Thank you for coming in. To our folks who are in here, we appreciate your time. To our folks who are out there, we appreciate you watching. So generative AI has been a really big topic recently in teaching and learning. We want to make sure that we're tackling this technology effectively and thoughtfully. And so we thought that we would actually leverage the knowledge and experience of a lot of different people that are working here at the university and hear from them tackling the challenges that you've encountered, questions that you have, and questions that have been sent to us as well. So to introduce myself briefly, I'm Alex Bauer. I'm the Educational Development Specialist for graduate students and postdocs here at the DTI. And also we have Danny Mann. I'm going to have you introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Danny Mann, Executive Director of DTI. I'm really glad you're all here. This is a really pressing thing in teaching right now, and one of the best ways to learn is from our colleagues, so appreciate everyone's time.
So I'm going to hand it off now to our educational development scholars. These are graduate students who have gone through our Pedagogical Scholars Program, a really intensive course on teaching, learning different advanced pedagogies, and also do the TA training themselves. And they're going to be facilitating today's panel. So I'm going to hand it off to them, and they're going to introduce themselves. So, McKenna?
Hi, my name is Cindy. I'm a graduate student in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology program, and I will be one of the facilitators here today.
I'm McKenna. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and I'll also be facilitating today. So I just wanted to mention first that the plan for today is to spend about an hour with a guided Q&A based on the questions we received from the questionnaire, the sign-up interest form. They're adapted from that, so hopefully we'll be able to get to a lot of the things you were all wondering, but we'll also have about 30 minutes at the end for an open Q&A. So if anything doesn't get addressed or you want to ask follow-up questions, that's a great time for you to do that. So we'll start by having each of our panelists, we can just go down the row, yeah, great, and just share your name, your pronouns, your department, and a brief overview of the ways that you've leveraged or adapted generative AI into your teaching. Thanks.
Hi everybody, my name is Christopher Lohman. I'm an assistant professor teaching in the Department of Anthropology. I'm currently teaching one of the department's upper division writing courses. It's called Writing a Time Traveler's Travel Guide, and students are asked to imagine traveling to a time and place of their choice, but rather than writing it like a regular history paper, the idea is to get them to think about everyday life and the kinds of practicalities. What are you going to wear? What are you going to eat? That usually get left out of history papers and textbooks. I have been using ChatGPT and ChatGPT Plus as a classroom tool to teach students skills about prompt engineering, to teach students the importance of citation tracing and verifying the information that they find online, and also as a tool for their pinpointing things that they need to work on in their writing, their sentence structure, their use of verbs and passive voice, and using ChatGPT and directed questions to coach them through improving their own writing.
Hi everyone, I'm Jasha Lee. I'm a graduate student in the Department of Language Science. I have been a teaching assistant for the course, the Psychology of Language, where the sole assessment, the major assessment of that course would be multiple choice questions. And when we're testing it with ChatGPT, ChatGPT can almost 100% master all the questions that we have made ourselves. So I have been doing prompt engineering to revise the multiple choice assessments. And after just tweaking a few words in the questions, we can just make ChatGPT to score like less than 50% on the multiple choice questions that we have designed, so that if student wants to use ChatGPT, they have to worry about the correctness of this tool on their own. And we were also hoping to teach students how to use ChatGPT properly, how to assess the correctness of ChatGPT, and how to extract and verify the knowledge that they can get from ChatGPT.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chen. I'm an associate professor of teaching. Thank you. in the School of Humanities, and I'm also the Associate Director of the program in Global Languages and Communication. This quarter, I'm teaching one of the pre-entry writing courses specially designed for undergraduate international students. And these students typically are unfamiliar with the writing conventions they're expected to follow here in English contexts. And adding to the complexities of learning about these difficult expectations, we are talking about generative AI tools and how to leverage these tools, how to interpret these tools as they try to get a sense of what they're expected to do. What I'm trying to do this term is to involve my students in almost every stage of our writing process. I want to see how they're actually using the tools, how they're understanding the tools. We have a lot of assumptions about what students want to do and are capable of doing, and I would like to get some firsthand data from students. And this would be very helpful for me, I think, as the instructor, to make decisions for myself and also for my students in the future. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Karina and I am a third year in the Spanish and Portuguese department. I am a doctoral student and I'm also a teaching assistant. This quarter I am teaching a course for heritage speakers of Spanish. And so we work with a very interesting population because even though they are heritage speakers and for many of them Spanish is their first language, their writing skills have not been developed necessarily. So in my class, for example, they might be writing essays for the first time in Spanish. And so even though the writing process is very similar in Spanish, many of them still have to work on their writing skills. So we are incorporating ChatGPT for the first time in helping them develop their ideas, fine-tune their Spanish. Sometimes they are self-conscious about the level of Spanish that they speak because it's more of an oral household Spanish, and they want to elevate their Spanish so it sounds more sophisticated and it's more relevant for the writing process. So we have been very intentional about how we incorporate ChatGPT in the classroom. So we dedicate time to opening up our laptops and deliberately asking the questions and just seeing what ChatGPT can suggest for our students, starting from the title to a thesis statement, an introductory paragraph, and then students can select what parts they want to incorporate and work with the content given by ChatGPT, but it's not generating the essay for them. And as mentioned by my colleague here, we also want to get data from our students and just have them reflect on their experiences using the technology.
Hi everyone, I'm QV Dang. I'm an assistant professor of teaching in electrical engineering and computer science. We've been integrating ChatGPT into both, I've been integrating ChatGPT into both some of our core undergraduate courses in electrical engineering, primarily programming classes, as well as our graduate courses as well. And this year I'm integrating it into our senior capstone where they're using it to help build their presentations, write cover letters, things like that. And we brought in other speakers from Applied Innovations to talk about what this means in terms of IP and copyright with stuff they're developing or co-developing with things like ChatGPT.
That's great. Thank you all for your answers. I'd like to give everyone a chance now to elaborate a bit more on what specifically the opportunities they see for ChatGPT or generative AI in their discipline as in regards to teaching, specifically as an instructor and also on the student side, which some of you already mentioned. And we also got some questions about writing related assignments for students as well. So it'd be great if some of you could speak to that too. We can go down the line again. And if you don't have anything to add, you can just pass for this one.
Sure. Let's see. So working in reverse order, you asked about opportunities for using generative AI in our discipline in particular. I think that I've heard a lot of people express concern and wariness regarding ChatGPT as something that they fear will substitute students' learning, especially when it comes to writing essays, writing reports, which is a key component in social science discipline with lots of humanities aspects like anthropology. So I think that some of the ways that I'm approaching it might be especially relevant for disciplines in which paper and report writing is especially important. I started the class thinking that ChatGPT would be a substitute for Wikipedia, a more conversational, more interactive, kind of assistant droid version of Wikipedia, that it would provide students with basic information that the same way that they use Wikipedia now would need to be verified, but it would get the ball rolling. And in some cases, that has been true. I have asked students to try prompting with a Wikipedia-like resource in mind. But I found that more than using it as a research starting point or a guide for further study, that the most powerful tool that students have used it for in the class has been plugging in things that they have created themselves and then adding to that, refining it, giving ChatGPT something to work with in the first place. And because I've asked students to keep journals and to describe their work process, to tell me, how are you using ChatGPT? What are the steps that you're going through? I've provided them with some, thank you. Sure, cool. I've provided them with some resources like Joel Glad's book on writing, which is available for free online, that goes through some college level writing basics. And there are 2 chapters in there on prompt engineering. So I had students read that, and then because they recorded in their journals what they did before reading it and what they did after that, I could see the way that generating lists, generating tables, generating comparisons, taking a big block of text and asking GPT not to create something out of its reference, but rather to reference that thing and to extract from it, has really changed their process of research, but I think in very positive ways. So I've been surprised by the amount of time spent putting things into ChatGPT to get things out, rather than assuming that it can just spit out anything.
I work in language for a couple of years, and most of the faculties and students in my department, they are all working in the field of computational linguistics. So I would like to say that myself and my peers, we have been using generative AI models before it becomes a thing. We have been using it for years, and we have seen its growth, and it's really impressive to see that how the generative AI is becoming a daily tool, and it's been tremendously useful for us as a teaching assistant. At first, there seems to be some challenges associated with it. For instance, a lot of class that I have been assisting undergrad classes with over 300 students. And in a class of that size, the most convenient way is to design some multiple choice questions where it can be auto-graded. But at the same time, if the ChatGPT, we have seen recurring problems where ChatGPT can handle those questions really well. And it raises, the concerns are twofolded. In the first place, there might be some academic dishonesty issues. And on the other hand, if we have a tool, if we have Wikipedia-like thing, if we have the Google search engine that can handle those questions so well, is it necessary for the student to still have to memorize and remember those kind of stuffs if they have some extra tools that can help them to process those knowledge? So with these 2 concerns, the prevalence of generative AI has really changed our design of multiple choice questions. So we have been researching on some of the characteristics of the ChatGPT's answers. And it turns like ChatGPT is a statistical engine. So its output is mostly driven by the statistical associations between the words in the context and the next continuation. And if we can design some questions that requires logical reasoning that goes beyond the statistical association, then this is where the human intelligence is necessary. For instance, we can just embed the question in a counterfactual settings where you have to have some sort of knowledge, but here you are in a counterfactual scenario where you have to do beyond the association and heuristics to give an answer based on the reasoning. And another tricks that we have been using is to design questions with multiple correct answers, because ChatGPT is a probabilistic engine, and it does not have a sense of absolute correctness. And it would be tricky to decide a threshold, like this answer has a 55% probability, is it correct or not? It's tricky to decide, but we as a human, we have an absolute threshold for what is wrong and what is correct. So another practice we have been using is to design questions with multiple correct answers, so that the student has to verify the answers themselves. They have to extract the absolute correctness based on the probability they have been seeing from the ChatGPT models. And I think after incorporating ChatGPT in the design of the course materials, it just transformed the way that we are designing those course materials, so that we are leaning more towards reasoning and the use of the knowledge rather than some knowledge-based memorization tasks for the student. And I think it's a win-win situation.
In my teaching context, I have found that generative AI, ChatGPT in particular, this is the tool I'm using this term, it's very helpful in providing me with examples that I can use to elicit my students' understanding about what they're newly learning in my class. So in my class this quarter, we're talking about synthesizing, and we are reading multiple articles on a shared topic. And there's so much news saying that college essays are dead, but when you actually feed articles like this into ChatGPT and then you look at the output, it doesn't really meet the advanced expectations in the college setting. So what I'm doing in my class is that I'm involving my students in analyzing output like this based on what they are learning from me in my class. And they found that it's very helpful as a tool in terms of getting a sense of what synthesizing looks like, how to work with multiple articles. But then based on our class discussions, they've also been able to identify the areas that ChatGPT's output is lacking. For example, complexity of ideas. The output generated by ChatGPT looks like a synthesis, but it only covers really vague and basic points, probably because of the statistical mechanism behind the tools. And students are very active in terms of adding the content based on their comprehension of the articles to make the synthesis more complex, to really reflect their knowledge about the topic based on their reading. And I found that this is very helpful for me to assess where they are in terms of understanding something. And also it gives them confidence. They can clearly see that they are better than ChatGPT. They can use this tool, but it's not going to replace them. They can identify areas that the tool is not really good at. And another thing that I think is worth talking about is academic integrity issues, because my students as international students are not familiar with the expectations associated with English academic writing. They don't really know what paraphrasing is, how to correctly cite information. And ChatGPT is great in terms of generating all sorts of examples for us to analyze in class, to interpret based on policies here at UCI, for example. And I can almost ask ChatGPT to generate any specific example that I want. To show students so we can discuss what it means to commit paraphrasing, plagiarism, for example. And before these tools became widely available, I would be writing those examples myself, but the number of examples is very limited. And also my style gets into the examples, and they're not always effective in achieving the pedagogical objectives I have. So this, for me, is a great teaching tool. Thank you.
In the Spanish context, there's obviously a lot that can be done with ChatGPT, as it can help students not just in the writing process, but also acquiring vocabulary, which is very important for some of them. In the context of my class, we have about 4 or 5 short essays, and students go through a very elaborate writing process with a pre-writing, brainstorming, a first draft. Then I provide feedback, and then they have a final draft. So it's very low stakes, and therefore, like the use of ChatGPT, it's just as a tool, and they're very aware of that. I actually incorporate a reflection activity at the end, and I ask them, how much did you use the platform, and just having that process to reflect on the use of ChatGPT, and making it very clear that we're not it's not supposed to substitute their work and their thinking process. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in the Spanish language for it, from vocabulary acquisition to the actual writing process.
Okay, for my classes, we went all over the board. At the very base level for our undergraduate core engineering course, it was a simple programming course where they designed circuits but through code. And the nice thing here is this kind of language, there aren't a lot of examples that you can find. So what we do in class that I started showing the students before we had ChatGPT and stuff like that was we would Google for examples. And of course, you wouldn't be able to find anything on Google. Then we would look through the book for examples and try and correlate it back and forth. And to give you some context, almost every single undergraduate class I have, we have a specific portion in the lecture where I teach them how to Google properly, because that's a skill that they need. So now we integrated it with ChatGPT, and I was like, okay, let's try and have ChatGPT answer this question or generate this example. And I think this is where it's the difference in the conversation with my colleagues and a lot of students starts diverging. A lot of people stop after about 30 minutes to an hour of experimenting with something and are like, oh, it doesn't produce anything very sophisticated, I'm okay. Or it might have answered the lab question very well and they just go like, okay, I can just submit this. So from the instructor side, I see that, oh, if I'm able to generate an answer for something in about 10 to 15 minutes using this tool, my lab is probably needs some updating. So I can make modifications to it and make sure that I can't answer it there. It's the same thing with, oh, can we find our solutions on Course Hero or the different sites that students are using? If we can, then we probably need to update our examples. So I'll actually do these projects inside class in real time and just show students, okay, for example, let's build an adder, just something that adds numbers with this language. So it's kind of simple to find an example in Google. Not exactly what you want, but you could modify it and it'll take you about 30 minutes to do. And then we did it with ChatGPT and it took us literally 2 minutes and we had something almost exactly what we wanted. And we're like, oh, this is cool. And then we run the program and then they find out, oh, the program doesn't actually run. It just looked right. And then we sit there and we analyze it. And we used to do this stuff by hand where I curated the examples like everybody else here. And you're like, oh my God, it takes me 2 hours to come up with an example that takes us 5 minutes to process. How am I going to fill a whole hour? We just generate these in ChatGPT. And the weird thing is the examples are very similar to what I do, but all of a sudden, because a computer generated it, and maybe because it's engineering students, they want to sit there and they analyze every line without me asking. And they'll be like, oh, there's the typo. Oh, it included the wrong thing here. So all of a sudden, engagement actually went up significantly. So we started using that as our in-class example tool. And I also allowed them to do for low stakes assignments, just to introduce them to this. I was like, I'll allow you to use ChatGPT. And then we have this conversation about copyright and privacy and security. So I'll show them the article. I think there was an article about a year or two ago where Samsung accidentally leaked a whole bunch of customer information into ChatGPT because they connected it, and now it's just in there. And I was like, it's the same thing with any information you provide. You're allowed to provide it, but this template here that I'm giving you is copyright by me. So if it ends up in there, then we have a copyright issue. And realistically, I told them it's not a big deal. Just make sure you understand what's happening, right? So then they're a lot more careful with how they use it. And for the undergrad class, that's about as far as I take it, which is just understanding how to use it as a tool. For my graduate class, now that they've actually learned all the technical skills that they needed at this point, I allowed them to use it for everything if they wanted. And the opportunity here was, I have some pictures, but typically in a 10-week course, they're able to build something, a very simple prototype that's just in text. It produces some basic map for indoor warehouse navigation. And with ChatGPT, a lot of the stuff that they spent time on in previous offerings, now it's all kind of done like half by a computer program. Like they're generating their own templates. And the average program now actually has all these extra graphics and fancy stuff that the students are able to add because they don't spend time on other stuff. But there's this trade-off. And with the graduate student class, which I'm going to start moving toward the undergrad, is I allowed them to use it any way they want as long as they show each other and us what they're using. So every example I generate, I'll show them the prompts I'm using. And we start looking at different prompts on showing them, hey, most people who only spend about a couple hours of this in total, they'll type a question like they would ask a regular person because it's supposed to be conversational. What they start realizing is, oh, you're supposed to give it a scenario and tell it that it's an expert programmer who's building this for this type of client. And you give it a whole story, and all of a sudden you add this little thing, and what it generates is totally different. And there's a site I linked on the Google form, learnprompting.org. I started using it. I haven't gone through all of it, but it's amazing because now stuff that we thought that ChatGPT couldn't do, and it can't do in like 1 or 2 prompts, but especially if you have ChatGPT Plus, you can give it a lot of information and it will build a skeleton for you. And it goes through this entire process where you're essentially building a first draft, a prototype, a revised edition, and it has all this context over hundreds of pages that it can generate. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. But then once we go through those examples, I was like, but look how long it would take you to set this up. It might be easier to do a lot of this by hand for now. But then they understand that, oh, there's a trade-off here. There's certain things that can get done really quickly. And then there's like this diminishing point of return where all of a sudden, the more hours I spend into it, it's not necessarily going to generate what I want. So even though I allowed students to use 100% generative AI for any projects that they turned in, most ended up using about 50 to 25% of it, just because they realized that, oh, I don't know how to use this tool well enough to generate what we need to for these weird specifications that we have, but I can get a lot of stuff done quickly. And that actually made them move by a lot faster. And a big selling point for a lot of our students was I showed them multiple job listings where prompt engineers get paid over $300,000 a year. And I was like, exactly what you're doing now, especially while the tool's free, because at some point it won't be free, right? While it's free, you can get all of this learning in now, so you'll be that much further ahead. So yeah, that's what I've been using it for in our classes.
That's great. Thank you. Some of you have already, that's okay. Okay. Some of you touched on this a little bit, but I wonder if, we'll kind of just popcorn a bit now, but if anyone wants to speak more about how you go about discussing generative AI with your students, specifically in regards to academic integrity. Some already mentioned their ideas, but we'd love to hear from some more perspectives.
I'm happy to provide more details about what I've been doing in my class. Because my students are undergraduate international students, they're freshmen, it's their first term, and they really don't have any sense of what they're supposed to do. And they often get into tricky situations that they really didn't want to get into because they don't have the knowledge. So ChatGPT, in a way, is not that different from any other tools for them, because even before ChatGPT was available, they the students still didn't have much knowledge about what counts as plagiarism in English academic contexts. And I've been adding ChatGPT as another consideration for my students, and I'm trying to help them understand that this is one additional tool that's widely available now. And if you don't use it appropriately, then you could get into situations that you don't want to get into. It's not that different from Grammarly, for example. If you have a paid version, you can have it do a lot of things. But in my writing class, I need to see what your writing looks like, what you're capable of doing. So you can use all these tools you would like, but you need to submit work that is convincing to me that it's your work. You're just leveraging the tools. You're not relying on these tools to generate output instead of working on the assignments yourself. And I also try to emphasize to students that regardless of how capable ChatGPT and other generative AI tools are, the UCI academic integrity policy still stands. And it does cover what they are not supposed to do pretty well. That is, you're supposed to turn in work that reflects your honest efforts, that follow professors' guidelines and instructions. And it is each student's responsibility to know what is appropriate in a class, what is not appropriate in a class. And if they are unsure about certain things, they should be checking with their professors instead of making decisions that might get them into trouble. So to sum up, I don't think ChatGPT is that different for my students, for my teaching context, in terms of how to discuss academic integrity. It's more a matter of helping my students understand how much they can use a tool, to what extent a tool can be used appropriately versus inappropriately. And this is something that they have to learn, not just from my course, but ongoing interaction with these tools.
I loved what you said, and just echoing a little bit in the context of the Spanish classroom, we also expect them to write at their level, right? And ChatGPT or generative AI is not the only platform. They actually use a lot of online translators. So they're thinking in English and then they translate their thoughts into Spanish, but that doesn't really reflect the writing process in Spanish. So I also tell them, make sure that this is showing your genuine effort. And because we have multiple iterations of these low-stake essays, I tell them it's okay to make mistakes. You're supposed to. It's a language course. And that's the whole point of me giving you feedback. You're providing me an opportunity to give you feedback and therefore improve your Spanish. So in the context of ChatGPT and plagiarism, I tell them it's okay if you use it for brainstorming, and if you're going to use certain phrases or words, underline them, because this is not like an actual formal paper. These are low-stake essays. They are allowed to be more like meta about the writing process. So I ask them to underline whatever they're using from the platform, and so that gives provides accountability and also makes them aware of like what they're able to produce versus what's more natural for them in the context of writing in Spanish.
That's great. I'm going to turn over to Cindy for the next set of questions.
Oh, we already went through them. Okay. All right. I've been taking notes as well, so I have these notes summarized afterwards. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about your current classroom context, and there's been some talk about creativity and how generative AI can expand or maybe limit creativity in your teaching, maybe, or even in your students' learning. So, is there anyone here who wants to talk about how GenAI, instead of just generating prompts, has also been used to expand creativity in your classrooms?
Sure. Last spring, when my partner and I were talking about the idea of this time travel class, as an experiment, I asked ChatGPT to write a travel guide for visiting Tenochtitlan in the 1500s. And it opened with the line, "Welcome, esteemed time traveler, to the vibrant city of Tenochtitlan." Da, 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 da. And that, for me, while it was amusing, it was cute because it sounded like C-3PO was taking you on a time travel. mission, but it also made me think about the biases that are underlying that language, that treatment of a traveler, and the kinds of assumptions that asking generative AI to write a travel guide, it's repeating the way that travel guides get written, which are mostly written for a very particular audience that is not terribly inclusive and certainly doesn't reflect the demographics of the classroom. And so, in addition to thinking about the ways that the AI output is limited in terms of comparing it to the creativity of students, I love the opportunity for students to critique something and to perceive mistakes in some outside assignment rather than just getting feedback from me or from their peers. If they can sit there and go, oh, this is terrible, then they can get fired up about spotting the problems and then avoid them themselves. And I think that back and forth has been really important for the students' creativity as well, because they get to critique along the way.
So the way I have been, so I would like to use the generative AI to help me brainstorming a lot, and it's just like you have a conversational partner for free, and he has that conversational partner has access to all the stored knowledge in all the books, and sometimes I was just chatting freely with ChatGPT, and then ChatGPT will just came out with some related concepts and items, and that would be inspiring. And sometimes when I was brainstorming an idea or came up with the plan for a class, I was just going to tell him in a storytelling setting. So here I'm going to do something, and I have this thought. What do you think about this in opinion of a senior expert or something like that? And then ChatGPT will just came up with some random answers, and then I will just do some research on those random answers that ChatGPT is generating. So this is one way that I'm using it. And the other way is I find ChatGPT is just very impressive to generate some very deceivable misinformation. And I have been using those misinformation as an example to elicit some critical thinking in students. So sometimes I would ask ChatGPT to write me a literature review on how language processing is on the neural mechanism of language processing, and ChatGPT will give a very cohesive articles with properly cited citations. But if once you dive into those citations, first of all, those articles don't really exist. And even though when this article does exist, it is not about the information that ChatGPT is talking about. So I will just give those misinformations to students, and they have to verify the misinformations in that ChatGPT article themselves. And along that process, they will have incredible ability to do critical thinking to assess the quality of the information and to properly searching for ideas in an academic setting.
Anybody else? Or pass?
No, they covered it great.
All right, great. Okay, actually there are some really good points brought up with Christopher and Jiaxuan as well. So the first thing was about this, our next question, which is about this idea of inclusivity and equity concerns through ChatGPT. So I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but there's been a lot of news articles and everything coming about how ChatGPT has the potential to be sometimes racist in their replies, and sometimes just there are a lot of equity concerns that come out with that. If you know. And so if you're using this kind of tool in a classroom of students, both in terms of teaching and in terms of students using it themselves for assignments, how do you approach this kind of potential for these not great outputs from ChatGPT? And like, do you talk to them like prior to things happening, or is it during, or do you talk about it during assignments? If any of you have any input about that.
Part of the reason why I've decided to proactively explore ChatGPT in my teaching is because I've noticed that a lot of my students, international students or domestic students from disadvantaged backgrounds, they're not as tech savvy as we would have imagined them to be. So they know about ChatGPT, they've heard about it, it's everywhere in the news, but when you ask them, are you using the tool for your study, learning, writing purposes? Many of them are not, because they don't have the literacy skills and the tech skills to use the tools at an advanced level. And I think it's a very critical issue to address from an instructor's perspective. I would like to help students develop the necessary skills so they can leverage these tools to reduce the gap that is already existing across different student populations. And if we don't teach these skills explicitly, then we might see a widening gap, digital literacy's widening gap. So that's something that I think is worth pursuing.
I have a few thoughts as well. So 2 points in connection to what you mentioned earlier, because in my class teaching heritage speakers, and we talk about issues that relate to the Latino community in the US. And so stereotypes and hurtful images are part of that narrative. And so even though ChatGPT hasn't really been used to, talk about issues, it can project some of those. So at the beginning of the quarter, we have a conversation about critical thinking and how to use the platform and how to think critically about what it's giving you and question it, right? Not to see it as something that you can just copy and paste, but also like to engage in dialogue with what you're seeing online. And the second point is in connection to what you mentioned as well, I see this as an opportunity to expose my students who come from disadvantaged communities. All of them, I would say, are first generation students. And so exposing them to digital literacy is also very important for their future opportunities in the career choices that they will make.
For our classes, we're taking from a slightly different perspective, and there's slightly different motivation for students, mostly because they're from the side that usually builds these tools, right? So they're particularly interested in how it works. And normally we always have this discussion about, so we have this data set that's coming in. Why is it biased? All of that stuff. What ChatGPT allowed and more recent tools allowed was they can actually play with it in real time and see what's happening. Like it's relevant to them right now versus me telling them, 10 years ago when I used this data set, it was bad. So we just threw it out and we use a different data set. So a lot of like the racist and hallucination stuff, I'll show them like some articles. I was like, hey, look, here's an issue when Microsoft tried to create a Twitter bot. And it was instantly racist when it came out. I was like, it was crazy. It's like, what did they do? Well, they just shut it down because it was just an experimental thing. And now let's look at ChatGPT. Version 3.5 took $4.5 million to train the model over a course of a month with 1,000 GPUs. I was like, we can't just throw it out. We can, but it's going to be a lot of money, right? So I was like, how do we work around it? How are scientists right now working around it? And now I'm not doing specific research in there, but my colleagues are. And all of a sudden now the students are interested. Oh, how are they doing it? So they take it and you can actually do these weird averages and you can visualize it and then you could retrain it so that it gives it better context. And you can actually do all of that before the user actually sees it. So now the students are interested in, so how do I get there? And how do I use it differently? And how do I now apply that to just my casual interaction with this to set it up? But it's actually all related to the different things. Like if you give it a story and a scenario, it will give you a slightly different answer. So all of a sudden now we're like, it's totally viable to keep this crazy database that has all this data. We kind of just pick and choose what it does. And then we can show them little images that it generates. So one of the current ones, so I'm only collaborating on this. I have no work on it other than taking the credit for showing them pictures. And I was like, it's really interesting that if you, the newest versions of ChatGPT, and you could do this before if you knew how to connect to it, they can generate images for you as well, connecting to different tools. So when you ask it to generate an image of a doctor, and you ask it to generate an image of 1,000 doctors, and then you average out the face, it's like this bald middle-aged white guy that you can see. It's really cool. It's neat. And then you do nurses, somehow slightly darker skin, looks female. You're like, huh, that's interesting. So it's like, accurate or not, we're like, oh, we can actually see a result here that you can't normally see through text, right? Because text, you have so many variables and dimensions. So we actually discussed with the students, this is how we would fix it. And now it's all that math that you hated doing. It's just statistical analysis and doing your linear regressions, all of that stuff. So having this tool on our side for engineers helps bring in this whole inclusive discussion in a way that's a lot more relevant for them. So then they're like, oh, okay, I can easily recognize this now, and we can actually fix it, and it's something we can do, even as undergrads and grad students. Yeah.
I was on another panel, and one of my colleagues had a great point. Now we have a visual representation of what social stereotypes look like. So when we make decisions about what to show on a flyer, for example, we have something that we don't want to include. I thought that was a great point.
Good. I never thought about the images in that way, so I'll also keep that in mind. Okay, so all of you have, used generative AI in, your classes, teaching, everything. What would you say to somebody who's kind of, on the fence? They're curious about it. They're not sure, like another professor, another graduate student in your department who's thinking of incorporating it into their class. What would you say to them? Like maybe like where to start, how to get started into the process?
I found that the big shift in my class with student interest in engaging with it came from the combination of a demonstration of what it could do. I gave them a short reading, and they didn't realize that it was written by ChatGPT, so that piqued their interest. And then the second thing that I think actually got the buy-in was reading about what prompt engineering is and how to do it, and they're getting to play with it for just a few minutes. And I got a DTI grant to implement this in the classroom, but only with student consent. And so when I first mentioned it, maybe a third of the students said, I'm not feeling it. And after the demonstration and the reading, 100% of them, what? I want this. So I think the same thing might go for colleagues as well, that a combination of a demo, but also learning a bit more about how to ask the questions. And I think that was a big shift for me as well, going from that, like I said earlier, conversational Wikipedia to thinking of it as something that you could put things in and get things out, and the emphasis was on the conversation, not the Wikipedia.
I would like to add a thought as well. I attended a online conference about the use of ChatGPT in the classroom, and one of the presenters talked about the June-July paradox. So in June, they are punished for using ChatGPT, but when they graduate and go into the workforce in July, they are punished for not knowing how to use it. And I thought that was very true and very relevant. And it goes back to this idea of digital literacy and teaching our students how to use the technology. And I think it's a great opportunity. We're at the frontier, right? We're the first generation using this technology. And I think it allows for a great opportunity to explore and teach our students about what it means to be a scholar, to be a critical thinker.
Yeah, I think the biggest buy-in for the students, I think, was pretty easy. You just show them use cases and they're like, ooh, okay. I think the initial buy-in, the discussion with other professors was everybody's just like, oh my God, there's going to be so much more work. So that's still an ongoing conversation. But I've noticed at least our newer faculty are a lot more motivated to try and use it and integrate it, especially since like literally every time we have an industry visitor, they're telling us they're using some version of it, their own particular version to do something, and they want to hire our students who know how to do this stuff. So then that's our buy-in is like, okay, we want them to have a job and this will help. And so, yeah, so we just had that conversation, and I just collect case studies. And my most recent one that I thought was really fun that I'm going to be sharing with all my students, because one of the things they have to do for senior capstone is have a team name, have a mission, all of that stuff. So I actually helped a friend. They're like, oh, I need to come up with a company name for this product that I'm doing, and we're going to do it internationally, all of this stuff. So I was like, okay. So it took me 5 minutes to ask ChatGPT and give them I was like, can you give me a company name for something that does this along with a slogan? And then I want to generate, and then I used another tool to generate a logo for that company. And within a day, we had a company, and they actually formed it after they did a patent and trademark search and everything. So I was like, oh, fantastic. So now I'm going to use that as a case study for the students. And I'd be like, look, you can use this here, and we're going to do a due diligence to make sure a company doesn't actually exist that has this name. And we can do an image search with Google to make sure our logo doesn't match somebody else's. So it's kind of neat where everything kind of flows together. And it's stuff that from the money side, I was like, you're easily paying a company who's going to work with you in the low tens of thousands. And if you were Nike, I think it was like $20 million or something to come up with the little swoosh. And I was like, ChatGPT can come up with a swoosh for you for nothing. So yeah, so I think that more people are starting to use it now.
Yeah, thank you for those answers. So this is the last of our kind of prepared questions. It's more of a general kind of feeler for people who are interested in this. Are you involved or you're aware of any UCI GenAI projects, maybe in like teaching or like working groups that other people who are interested in could potentially look into and participate in?
So I was working on this project with my advisor, Greg Scontris, on how to leveraging the prompt engineering to design exam questions that are robust to ChatGPT answers. So basically, we are right now developing a toolkit and some useful suggestions about how to revise your multiple choice questions or any kind of questions such that ChatGPT is very likely to give the wrong answer on those kind of questions without having to changing the content of your question too much. And I think this project is still in early stage, but we are hoping to get questions from other courses, and we can help to revise them to be ChatGPT robust.
Part of the grant funding that part of our proposal for the grant funding was to create a working group in social sciences. So if any of you happen to be in social sciences and want to come talk to me, two other professors of teaching in my department, Angela Jenks and Ian Strawn, are part of the same grant. And we're hoping to form a working group and figure out what other folks are doing in social sciences. So come chat with me.
In addition to my undergrad teaching, I've designed a series of graduate writing courses, and I've brought the flyer for our next quarter's offerings. In these graduate level writing courses, one is writing for scholarly publication. The other is graduate writing for thesis and dissertation. I'm looking into how to help advanced graduate students leverage generative AI tools so that the focus can be more on your creativity that's coming from your research content instead of writing up the informational research articles to disseminate the research findings. If anybody is interested in learning more about that series, I'm happy to talk.
All right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. All right. So those are our prepared questions that we have today. So we like to open up the floor to participants here. If you have any questions, we already have one here. Okay.
Yeah, thank you all. This is really fantastic and great. Oh,
Microphone. Should I just microphone?
oh, sure.
Yeah, let's make sure that one's on.
Hello. Hi, my name is Denise Payan. I'm an associate professor in public health and am not teaching this quarter, so this is very timely as I prepare classes the next couple quarters. I was in the anti-camp. Like, I don't want to give it anything that's mine. I was thinking about that, but increasingly, I went to the dentist. My dentist in Irvine is using AI integrated for diagnostics for cavities, and they explained it to me, and I was like, that's amazing. You're gonna see it more and more. And I was like, this can be a tool. So it's interesting, the demonstration and the discussion, because now I'm like, this is really valuable. So some of my classes are writing intensive, and I'm trying to think about baseline writing. And a couple of you talked about, authentic and natural writing. How do you establish in such a short period of time and in larger classes that authentic, natural writing, that baseline writing is how I'm thinking about it, to kind of assess over time? How can you do that more from a grading perspective and to give feedback? Are there recommendations?
On the first day of the class that I'm teaching right now, I have 15 students, so this was very manageable. I gave each student a simple notebook, and they were all different cover colors, so they got to pick whichever one spoke to them. But every day in class, I have them responding to prompts, handwriting. And a lot of the students said, wow, I haven't done this since elementary school. I didn't realize that I like handwriting things. But that also gave me a baseline from which to judge what are their assignment writing techniques versus the things that they're writing in a more journal, conversational, handwritten way. And I might be misinterpreting what you meant by baseline, but in this case, the way that I interpreted it was where does student writing stand without any of the tools? And with a bamboo pen and a simple notebook, I get that. At the end of each class, they upload photos of their journal into a time travel journal log. And it's been very, very useful for seeing the progress that they have gone on throughout the quarter.
Thank you. Christina Euban, assistant professor in public health, and apparently you have to have this colored stripe shirt to be a professor in public health here at UCI. So I have a 440 student undergrad class. They have big midterm papers, and ChatGPT was just everywhere. And I felt that in the spring I had a better handle on it, teaching smaller grad classes. But this fall has been wild. All the things that you have all commented on have popped up, and it's like some of these students aren't even reading the papers. So I guess so this was all very helpful. I guess one of my colleagues has a prompt engineered kind of template for a rubric, and said, why don't you just have ChatGPT grade your students' papers with your rubric? And it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is the singularity is upon us. So, but it made me think. It felt at first kind of, well, then it's just another thing for me to read and spot check, right? But then also I don't know. I just am curious to know, is there a place for us to use ChatGPT and then evaluating their, leverage? I don't. Thanks.
In one of the class that we have been teaching, we used to have those open-end questions, and that's huge class. So after a while, we just discovered like a lot of the answers seems like ChatGPT generated, and it's just difficult to find a strong evidence for that as well. And it's just too much work to ask each student to come to have an individual meeting. So eventually, we just decide to ask ChatGPT to write an essay, and we do some modification on that ChatGPT generated essay. And the student task is to assess the quality of the essay. So the student will be the grader, and what we'll be reviewing would be the grading from the students. And as this essay is mostly generated by ChatGPT, so ChatGPT won't have much critics on its own output, but as a student, they might have their own thoughts on that ChatGPT essays. So it would be the other way around, and it has significantly reduced the workload while maintaining the teaching quality.
In my context, I haven't gone that far to have ChatGPT grade my students' papers, but I'm asking them to use ChatGPT to self-grade. So I'm giving them a list of criteria that we talk about in class, everybody agrees on, and then I provide a short prompt that says, evaluate my writing based off this list of criteria that my professor is providing, and then they share the output with me, and then they decide what to do with the output. And I've noticed that ChatGPT is pretty good in identifying basic things. For example, your APA style is completely off, and then there's so many spelling, grammar errors in your writing, and these are issues that students can work on by themselves, and then that saves me a lot of time. So they go through 1 or 2 rounds of self-evaluation, interacting with ChatGPT, and then submit a draft. And that draft is much better compared with the very initial draft that they came up with. And I also ask them to provide a log, so I know what kinds of interactions they're having with the tool, so I'm aware what kinds of additional work that's not the students that goes into the draft I'm seeing.
Thank you. Hi. I have a bit of a naive example from my childhood. Before Google came up, if ever we ran into a word that we didn't understand, we'd ask our teacher, and our teacher would be like, look it up in a dictionary. And when we'd look it up in a dictionary, we'd look up other words accidentally around that word and end up learning a lot more words than the word that we were just looking for. So I mean, there's so which I call collateral learning. Like, it's not necessarily what you're looking for that you're learning, but you're also learning some of the stuff around it. So my question is, because the use of ChatGPT is so oriented towards putting in the right prompt and getting an answer that's tailor-made for the answer, that's like close to the answer that you really want, what are your thoughts on all the peripheral learning that would happen if you did it, if you DIY'd it? Did it yourself without using ChatGPT? Thank you.
Very briefly, one of the activities that we did in class was citation tracing, was testing, could students verify the things that ChatGPT was spitting out? So we went through archive.org, we went through JSTOR, Google Scholar, and they were not just critiquing the ChatGPT output for its accuracy alone. They had to show beyond the blogs in Wikipedia, which it tends to cite, where that information could be verified. And the ultimate part of that was they had to go to the library on campus and find a book that could help verify it. Of course, you're in a library, you find one book, it's surrounded by the other books, you've got the same thing as the word in the dictionary. So while I agree that there are some peripherals that are different, I think there's still opportunities to introduce that context in creative ways.
This is a question that I was talking with a colleague about, is shifting what we think we need to teach students. And I know a couple folks have already spoken to this, is like, well, okay, if ChatGPT can do this, then I need to up my class. Like, I need to shift things. Coming from a writing heavy discipline, is where do you see that stepping in? The things that need to be taught and amplified, and then the things that's kind of superfluous. We didn't really realize it because we had to go through all these steps. Is where are y'all finding those moments in ChatGPT use in your classrooms?
This quarter, I think I've revamped my curriculum significantly because of the goals that I have for myself and also my students. I'm focusing more on the process instead of the product. And I think the availability of the generative AI tools allows me to focus more on how students are actually interacting with the tasks in class, the goals and requirements that I set for them, instead of just evaluating their performance based on that piece of writing they turn in at some point of the term. So we can quickly generate a piece of writing that, according to the prompt I provide them, and then we can spend so much time analyzing how this is not meeting every aspect of the criteria, instead of spending a lot of time having students produce a subpar piece of writing and then analyzing it and then telling them how their writing is not meeting the criteria. That saves me a lot of time, and also the students are not that discouraged from doing all that amount of work, just like one of the colleagues was saying here. And I think students enjoy the class more because of how they get to really talk about whether they're learning something that they were not capable of doing, whether they were able to produce something that was beyond their level at the beginning of the quarter, instead of just keeping producing writing that gets criticized by professors. I thought that's great.
My class isn't strictly about writing, but we have experiencing a shift from focusing on explaining the rules to explaining how to adopt those rules. So before that, everything is based on the rules that we have in linguistics. But now we are just in the question itself, we are just defining some new operations, and we ask the students to apply those new operations that they have never seen. Those are just invented in a second ago. We're drafting those questions, and they are asked to adopting those kind of invented rules to apply to the questions. So in a sense, we both assess whether or not they have understand the rules that is commonly used in linguistic knowledge, and also whether they have the ability to apply any rules that they have just encountered to any unseen questions.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I wanted to expand upon a question that you asked, or maybe just phrase it differently. It might be the same one. But we were thinking about, using ChatGPT for grading, or just leveraging it as a teacher. Something that we're really interested in at DTI is supporting the wellness of teachers. So we're calling it pedagogical wellness. We're thinking about not only the wellness of the students, but also the faculty and graduate students themselves. So I wanted to revisit this idea and ask you all, in what ways has ChatGPT made your life easier as a teacher? Maybe, we talked a little about grading, but maybe other things. None of us feel like we have time, and that's the hardest thing, is if only we had more time. Where has it saved you time as a teacher, so that we can start making things more efficient for ourselves? I heard generating examples was one thing, but are there other ways where it's lightening the load or making things better in some way for you?
For me, breaking down a longer piece of writing into smaller tasks and having my students work on each of the smaller tasks first is saving me a lot of time, because I get to know what difficulties they are experiencing at a point, and I can focus on that point instead of having them submit a complete piece of writing, and then I have to spend time grading that long piece of writing, and then the outcome is not necessarily that the students are encountering different problem. It's the same problem. It's just I have to spend more time trying to identify the problems by looking through a longer piece of writing. Now I can break it down. For example, when I teach synthesis, I break it down into reading one article, having students interact with that one article, generating a brief summary of that one article, and then going on to the second article, and then going on to identifying connections between the articles, and then things like that. And for each task, I can only focus on one thing, and that saves me a lot of time.
This is more collateral to teaching, but it has changed the way that I'm approaching some of my writing. And when I've had to write grants, when I've had to write abstracts for syllabi, which in the past have sometimes been like, I'm teaching intro to archaeology. What else do I need to say? Asking ChatGPT to help me write that paragraph, usually what I end up keeping is 1 or 2 sentences, but I have something to edit. And I don't know about the rest of you, but personally, I find editing to be far more rewarding than composing out of nothing. So if, like what I'm giving my students to critique, if I have something in front of me, I'm like, well, that doesn't sound good. It's easier for me to be creative in response to something. And so that has changed how I approach things. For the DTI grant, I didn't use anything that ChatGPT gave me for the grant except for one sentence, which was, this will provide a cutting edge and futuristic way for students to look at the past. And I was like, that is far too cute for me not to use. And this is to get them to use ChatGPT anyway. But I think that the sort of the call and responsive writing has changed because of ChatGPT.
How do you encourage students in written submissions to document and then give credit to ChatGPT? And then, how far does that go? Is that just in the learning situation or context, or, in publication? I've noticed a lot of letters of recommendation now are telling me as the recommender, I can't use ChatGPT and things like that. So I'm just wondering, that line between ownership. Thank you.
I have students include a self-description of how they have used ChatGPT across multiple assignments, and their description of how they used it is graded and is part of their handwritten journals. It's part of their final assignment. So they are self-reporting and encouraged to be open about how they're using it, and that teaches me what they're doing as well.
Some of the conference that I have been to is targeting the natural language processing community. So this is the conference to research about generative AI models. And they have a very detailed guideline about how to properly cite the use of language models in your own writing. And they have different components, like if you are using ChatGPT more like a Grammarly tool, are you just using ChatGPT to catch some grammar mistakes, or are you using ChatGPT during the brainstorming stage, or do you have your first draft and then use the ChatGPT to do some modification of it, or are you just asking ChatGPT to write down the entire paragraph for you? And they have listed all of these cases, and then you can just look at the guideline to see where this strict line is at. And I highly recommend the that citation guideline for ChatGPT. And I think the conference is called Association for Computational Linguistics. And I have been looking at that guideline a lot to help me to stay within the line.
I'm going to start using that. For my class, I just tell the students whatever they're submitting still has to be their own work. I'll allow them to use ChatGPT or other generative tools, but I also show them how I'm checking for academic integrity issues. And that is, I have those code repositories that they're referencing, all of that stuff, and I show them the software and I show them me running it. And I was like, if it flags you, then we have to have a conversation. Again, that doesn't mean anything yet, but that means you'll have to come into the office, explain what you wrote and why you wrote it the way you did. So they just recognize that. And that also goes back with, we do have a small amount of time that we talk about copyright, and they understand that ChatGPT ignores all copyright messages. Under certain scenarios, like what is it, Getty Images, they've removed a lot of that stuff now from their things, and certain sites they'll remove from. And also students have brought up, they're like, oh, but this generative AI site says it gives me the copyright. Then we go have a little talk about that on they can't give you a copyright that they don't own. And nobody has a copyright on this because copyright is for human written stuff. So whatever it generated, they can't give you a copyright. But if they blatantly copied and pasted something, and I'll show them some examples of it, mostly through images because it's a lot easier to show them. It's like, here's this AI generated image, and you can see the watermark logo on it. So it's the same thing with the text. So then the students understand, oh, I better double check that my whatever I'm submitting isn't easily available or large chunks of it aren't available. Yeah.
So to transition a bit, we had sent before today's panel to the panelists a document where they could compile some ideas. They have some resources that they found particularly helpful. There's some that were mentioned today that are already in there. So you can use this QR code or this link here to access them. And anyone can edit them. So once you have this link, you can add things that you found that you think are helpful so that we can all kind of have this built resource together. Does anyone still need it? Okay. And then we also would like everyone to take the last few minutes of our time together to complete this workshop feedback survey. Basically just seeing what was the most helpful to you, what you might like to see in the future if we were to do a similar panel or a similar type workshop. But we really appreciate everyone being here and especially our panelists for their time.